The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. In the heart of Colombia, behind layers of steel bars, rusted fences, and guard towers that watch the dust rise off the courtyard, sits a prison the world was never supposed to see this way. Picaleña was meant to be a modern correctional facility, a controlled environment where order outweighed chaos. Instead, it became a monument to failure, a place where 5,000 inmates fight daily for water, food, and space to breathe, a place where gangs run the blocks, guards fear the hallways, and survival is a currency paid in blood or money. This documentary takes you inside one of the most dangerous and overcrowded prisons on the planet, a system pushed beyond collapse, a world built to contain violence that only grew stronger inside its walls. This is the story of Picaleña Prison and the people trapped within its impossible design. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The prison built to fail. Picaleña Prison began with an idea that looked good on paper: create a structured, modern correctional facility capable of holding around 1,800 inmates. Colombian officials believed that with enough space, security, and regulation, Picaleña could stand as a model for how incarceration should work in a country struggling with waves of crime, conflict, and overcrowded detention centers. It was meant to be a controlled environment, a place where order was supposed to be guaranteed by design. What happened instead was the opposite. The prison became a symbol of how quickly a system collapses when its foundation is weak, its oversight thin, and its population pushed far beyond its limits. The first cracks appeared early. Within a few years of opening, Picaleña began receiving far more inmates than it could safely manage. Colombia's criminal justice system was overloaded, arrests were rising, and courts were funneling offenders into facilities already stretched thin. By the time Picaleña reached its intended capacity of 1,800, officials were already ignoring warnings from human rights monitors. Intake continued anyway. The numbers kept climbing. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Today, more than 5,000 inmates live inside the same space originally designed for just under 2,000. Every hallway, cell, and courtyard carries the weight of bodies and tension it was never meant to hold. The physical layout of the prison tells the story in simple terms. Hallways meant for two-way foot traffic turn into bottlenecks of men pressed shoulder to shoulder. Shared bathrooms double as sleeping areas. Cells built for 4 men house 10 or more. Mattresses cover the floors until there is no floor left, and when supplies run out, inmates lay directly on the concrete. The overcrowding alone would be enough to destabilize a facility, but at Picaleña, it was only the first part of the collapse. Water shortages became a daily reality. The infrastructure could not support the surge in population. Entire cell blocks sometimes went hours or even days with little access to running water. Tanks emptied faster than they could be refilled. Inmates fought for the chance to wash themselves or fill plastic containers before the taps ran dry again. Food shortages followed the same pattern. Kitchens designed to feed fewer than 2,000 inmates struggled to stretch supplies for more than 5,000. Meals were often incomplete, reduced, or simply skipped. Human rights reports documented cases of prisoners losing drastic amounts of weight within their first months inside. Medical care broke down next. With thousands more inmates than the staff could handle, basic treatment became a luxury. Sick prisoners waited days to see a doctor. Those with infections, injuries, or chronic conditions suffered without proper attention. Diseases spread quickly through shared spaces made damp and unsanitary by overuse. Some men relied on fellow inmates for treatment using improvised remedies because professional help was either unavailable or overwhelmed. Overcrowding also changed the social structure of the prison. When a facility reaches extreme capacity, the official power structure weakens. Guards cannot monitor every hallway. They cannot supervise every corner or break up every fight. They cannot search every room, every cell, every bag, or every visitor. The balance shifts, and order becomes something negotiated rather than enforced. The prison becomes a living organism that controls itself from the inside, usually through the strongest, most organized groups. This was the tipping point for Picaleña. The guard began losing control of entire wings. Inmates told investigators that in many blocks, uniformed officers rarely entered unless accompanied by riot police. Some areas became no-go zones for staff. When order collapses, the people left to define the new rules are not the ones trained to maintain safety. They're the inmates who can command fear, violence, and loyalty. Picaleña became a place governed by internal codes rather than Colombian law. The reputation of the prison spread beyond its walls. Journalists, human rights organizations, and family members of inmates described it as one of the toughest and most chaotic facilities in Latin America. A prison built to create stability instead became a pressure cooker of violence and desperation. Officials insisted they were working to improve conditions, but the problems were bigger than any single reform could fix. The capacity issue alone created a chain reaction affecting every other part of the system. Once that failed, everything else followed. Picaleña's story cannot be told without acknowledging the people caught inside its failure. Guards worked long hours in unsafe conditions with limited tools to control the population. Inmates, both gang members and ordinary men, lived in an environment where fear was constant and survival was never guaranteed. The building itself, once envisioned as a structure of discipline and rehabilitation, became a warehouse of human suffering and institutional neglect. The collapse of Picaleña wasn't sudden. It was a slow erosion, one warning ignored at a time, one hallway overcrowded, one cell filled beyond capacity, one broken promise of reform. Over the years, the situation hardened into something that looked permanent. The facility's reputation grew to worldwide infamy. It became one of the world's toughest prisons not because it housed the most dangerous men, but because the system inside its walls was never built to withstand what it was forced to hold. Picaleña's foundation wasn't strong enough to support its mission. And once it fell apart, everything that happened inside became the consequence of a prison built to fail. Gangs, territories, and a hidden power structure. Inside Picaleña Prison, the official rules written by the government matter far less than the unwritten rules enforced by the inmates. Over time, the enormous overcrowding, the lack of guards, and the collapse of basic order created a vacuum of authority. In that vacuum, gangs rose. They filled the spaces where the state failed. And from that point on, Picaleña stopped functioning like a correctional facility and began operating like a miniature city controlled by criminal factions. The guards might wear the uniforms, but it is the inmates who dictate how the prison truly works. The most powerful groups inside Picaleña include Los Países, Los Rastrojos, and several regional crews connected to Colombia's wider criminal networks. These gangs control their own blocks, their own corridors, and sometimes entire floors. They establish checkpoints inside the prison where newcomers must stop, answer questions, or pay fees. They assign who sleeps where. They determine who gets a bed and who lies on the floor. They control access to showers, water sources, and even basic movement across the facility. The prison becomes divided into territories, and crossing from one to another without permission can lead to beatings, stabbings, or worse. What makes Picaleña unusual is how openly this structure operates. Guards themselves have admitted that whole wings are effectively run by inmates. In some areas, officers only enter with protective gear or riot teams, and sometimes not at all. This absence of authority gives gangs room to form governments inside the prison, governments built on violence, extortion, and strict hierarchy. Leadership positions often belong to the longest-serving members or the ones with the most influence on the outside. Decisions about punishment, negotiations, disputes, and markets are made through internal councils that function independently of the prison's official administration. New inmates quickly learn that survival depends on aligning themselves with someone who can protect them. If a man enters Picaleña without connections or money, the first days are often the most dangerous. In some blocks, newcomers are lined up and questioned. Where are you from? Who do you know? What crime did you commit? Are you affiliated with any group? Based on the answers, gang leaders decide whether the newcomer is useful, neutral, or a potential threat. Men with no backing often become targets for extortion. They're charged rent just to exist inside the block. Rent for mattress, rent for water, rent for access to a bathroom, rent for protection from other extortion attempts. Everything has a price. Territorial control is maintained through force. Violence is the language of authority. If a smaller group challenges a powerful one, retaliation is swift. Stabbings are the most common method, since improvised blades are easy to hide and cheap to produce. Reports describe inmates sharpening metal scraps, broken locks, and even pieces of wire mesh into weapons. Larger conflicts may involve fire, a method used to smoke out rival groups or signal that a block is under siege. When a riot breaks out in Picaleña, it is rarely spontaneous. Tensions build for days, sometimes weeks, until one spark sets off the inevitable. Inside each gang-controlled block, daily life is organized around the faction's rules. Los Países, known for being one of the more structured groups, maintain strict discipline among their members and those living under their territory. They assign cleaning duties, control schedules, and enforce quiet hours. Los Rastrojos, more fragmented and aggressive, tend to operate with less internal order but greater unpredictability, making their blocks some of the most feared inside the prison. Smaller regional crews often align themselves with one of the major groups for survival, creating alliances that shift based on power struggles happening both inside and outside the prison. The underground economy inside Picaleña is another pillar of gang control. Since guards cannot effectively manage contraband or monitor every entry point, gangs run illegal markets that distribute phones, drugs, weapons, and stolen goods. The trafficking routes are straightforward. Corrupt officers smuggle items inside, often at the request of gang leaders who pay them well. Once inside, the goods move through the inmate networks and are sold at inflated prices. A single phone can cost several months' income from an inmate's family. Drugs circulate openly in some blocks, creating dependencies that gangs exploit for profit. Control over resources also gives gangs political leverage. If an inmate defies their rules, the consequences extend beyond physical punishment. A gang can block access to essential items, deny water, or prevent a man from receiving help if he becomes sick. They can forbid him from sleeping in a safe area. They can isolate him socially by declaring him untouchable. In a prison where survival depends on cooperation and protection, isolation is often as dangerous as violence itself. Despite the brutality, the internal structure inside Picaleña serves a purpose. It maintains a form of order where the official system cannot. Without the gangs, the overcrowding and lack of oversight would lead to total chaos. Instead, the strongest groups enforce their own version of stability. It is harsh, exploitative, and unforgiving, but it functions. Blocks controlled by disciplined factions tend to experience fewer spontaneous fights, while blocks controlled by disorganized groups see more frequent outbreaks of violence. In a twisted way, the gangs provide the governance the state failed to deliver. For guards working inside the prison, this power imbalance shapes their daily reality. Many officers avoid confronting the strongest factions directly. Some cooperate to maintain peace. Others participate in contraband trafficking out of fear or financial incentive. The line between corruption and survival becomes blurred. Guards know that attempting to dismantle a gang's internal structure risks triggering widespread violence that will endanger both staff and inmates. They walk a fragile line between asserting authority and avoiding conflict that could spiral out of control. The hidden power structure inside Picaleña is not hidden at all. Everyone knows who controls what. Everyone understands the rules, the territories, and the consequences of ignoring them. The gangs act as the real administrators, the real lawmakers, and the real enforcers. They define justice through their own system, a system where the strongest thrive, the weakest pay, and every decision is backed by force. In a prison built to fail, power doesn't disappear. It simply shifts. And in Picaleña, it shifted into the hands of the men who could control fear better than the guards ever could. Life for ordinary inmates. Fear, survival, and corruption. For inmates who aren't part of a gang. Picaleña Prison is a daily test of endurance. These men exist at the bottom of the internal hierarchy, caught between overcrowding, extortion, and the constant threat of violence. Their survival depends on a fragile balance of compliance, caution, and whatever resources their families can spare. Inside these walls, the difference between living and breaking often comes down to whether an inmate can afford to pay for protection, access, or simply a place to lie down at night. The first reality an ordinary inmate faces is the cost of space. With more than 5,000 men crammed into a facility built for only 1,800, beds become luxury items. New arrivals often sleep on the floor for weeks, sometimes months. Former inmates have described entire cell blocks where men sleep shoulder to shoulder across the concrete, lined up so tightly that one person turning over can set off a chain reaction of movement. Bathrooms become sleeping areas when cells overflow. Some men stretch thin blankets beside urinals or showers because there's no other place to rest. For those who cannot tolerate the floor, there is only one alternative: pay rent. In gang-controlled blocks, the price of a bed varies depending on the faction in power, the size of the cell, and the level of protection attached. Some beds cost a single payment. Others require weekly or monthly fees. The gangs treat these payments like taxes. If an inmate refuses or falls behind, he risks being beaten, removed from the cell, or forced in the lowest areas of the block where conditions are even worse. Water access creates another layer of hardship. Overcrowding strains the prison's infrastructure, and many blocks experience long hours without running water. When the taps finally activate, inmates rush to fill buckets, bottles, and plastic containers before the supply shuts off again. Fights often break out around water stations. In some blocks, gangs control the taps and charge inmates for access. Men who cannot pay must rely on leftovers, recycled water, or whatever they can collect from leaking pipes. Food shortage is an equally harsh burden. Meals served by the prison are often insufficient. Small portions of rice, thin soups, or undercooked vegetables stretched far beyond capacity. Some inmates receive food from family members during visits, but many have no such support. For them, hunger becomes routine. The prison's internal market, run by various groups, sells additional food at inflated prices. Simple items like bread or packaged snacks can cost several times their value outside. Men without money often barter with whatever they have: clothing, cigarettes, labor, or even favors. Corruption ties everything together. In Picaleña, the boundaries between inmate trade and officer involvement blend into one continuous system. Guards have long been documented smuggling and contraband: cell phones, chargers, knives, SIM cards, cigarettes, and drugs. Some officers do it for profit, others out of fear, and some simply because the institution's oversight is too weak to stop it. This constant flow of goods feeds the underground economy and strengthens the gangs who control distribution. For ordinary inmates, corruption is often the only way to reduce their suffering. A bribe might buy a safer assignment, a transfer to a quieter block, access to medical care, or permission to make a phone call. Officers who should enforce order instead become part of the informal economy, taking payments to bypass overcrowded lines or avoid dangerous areas. The system becomes a cycle. Corruption fuels gangs, gangs fuel extortion, extortion fuels fear, and fear fuels more corruption. Medical care for ordinary inmates is one of the most painful points of neglect. With thousands of men needing treatment and only a small medical team available, long delays are unavoidable. Sick inmates sometimes wait days just for evaluation. Minor injuries become infected. Chronic conditions worsen. In blocks with weak protection, seeking medical help can be dangerous. Leaving your territory means exposing yourself to other gangs or extortion demands. Some inmates treat themselves with improvised materials, using torn fabric as bandages or sharing painkillers smuggled inside. The emotional toll is severe. Former inmates describe the constant tension as a weight that never lifts. Every walk down a hallway requires awareness. Every interaction can become a threat. You cannot show fear, but you cannot show disrespect either. You cannot move too quickly or too slowly. You cannot stare at the wrong person or ignore the wrong question. Ordinary inmates live inside a maze of unwritten rules, and breaking any one of them, even by accident, can lead to immediate consequences. One of the few lifelines comes from the outside: family visits. For many inmates, this is the only source of emotional support and basic supplies. Families bring food, clothing, soap, and money. In some cases, relatives take great risks traveling long distances to deliver items that the prison cannot provide. But even visits come with complications. Gangs monitor what enters and sometimes demand a cut. Corrupt officers demand small payments or intentionally delay entry to pressure families into offering money. The system is built in a way that extracts value from everyone connected to the inmate, not just the inmate himself. The psychological pressure intensifies for those who have no gang affiliation but still must coexist within gang-controlled areas. They witness punishments, threats, and violence regularly. Stabbings occur not in isolation, but in crowded spaces where dozens of witnesses stand powerless to intervene. Fires set during disputes fill entire blocks with toxic smoke. When riots break out, ordinary inmates are the ones caught between factions, trapped in cells or hallways until guards regain control. Yet despite all this, many inmates find ways to survive. Some form small alliances with other non-gang individuals. Others work small jobs inside the block, cleaning, cooking, repairing, to earn minimal protection or small payments. A few maintain low profiles, avoiding confrontation and keeping to routines that reduce exposure to danger. In an environment built on unpredictability, routine becomes its own form of defense. Life for ordinary inmates in Picaleña is not defined by a single hardship, but by a constant layering of them. Overcrowding, extortion, hunger, corruption, violence, neglect. Each problem reinforces another, creating a cycle that traps men with no real path toward rehabilitation or safety. The prison becomes less a place of correction and more a survival arena. The rules are written by the strong, enforced by fear, and endured by those who have no choice but to live through them. Picaleña was designed to control inmates. Instead, it forces inmates to control themselves through systems of power that the state can no longer manage. And for the ordinary men trapped inside, this reality reshapes every moment of their lives. Escapes, riots, and the day the walls fell apart. Picaleña Prison has always carried tension in the air, like a cord stretched too tight. With overcrowding, gang control, and constant shortages, it was only a matter of time before that tension erupted. Over the years, the facility has seen violent riots, escape attempts, fires, and complete breakdowns of control that exposed how fragile the prison truly is. Some incidents were small flare-ups. Others became national scandals. But no matter the scale, each event pushed the prison further into chaos and revealed how easily order could vanish inside its walls. One of the earliest major riots occurred when overcrowding reached a severe level. Reports describe inmates lighting fires in trash piles and begging to force guards to pay attention to their demands for water and food. Smoke filled entire blocks. Prisoners pounded on metal doors, shouting through cell bars while flames spread across narrow hallways. Guards responded with tear gas, batons, and riot gear, but the smoke and darkness made visibility nearly impossible. The riot eventually ended, but the damage lingered. Walls were blackened, cells were destroyed, and trust between inmates and staff eroded even further. The most infamous crisis arrived in 2015. By then, Picaleña had already gained a reputation as one of Colombia's most overcrowded and unstable prisons. The population far exceeded its intended capacity, and conditions had deteriorated to the point where humanitarian groups were documenting cases every month. That year, a combination of overcrowding, lack of medical attention, and routine mistreatment pushed inmates to their breaking point. Eyewitness reports described the 2015 riot as explosive and immediate. It began in one block when inmates confronted guards about shortages of clean water. Tensions escalated until a confrontation turned physical. Several inmates were beaten during the dispute, triggering an eruption of anger across the block. Word spread rapidly through the prison, and soon other blocks joined the upheaval. Fires ignited. Doors were smashed. Stabbings broke out between rival factions taking advantage of the chaos. The riot expanded like a chain reaction, block after block. As the situation spiraled, guards retreated from certain wings entirely. They regrouped at secure points while inmates took control of large sections of the facility. Videos recorded during the riot captured men with gangster tattoos, holding makeshift weapons, shouting orders, and moving through smoke-filled hallways. The footage revealed just how quickly Picaleña could fall apart when its fragile control systems were overwhelmed. Medical teams struggled to reach injured inmates. Many were trapped behind barricades formed during the chaos. Fires spread along corridors, forcing men to flee through areas controlled by rival factions. Desperation took over. Some inmates smashed windows to breathe clean air. Others used soaked blankets to shield themselves from flames. When riot police finally entered the prison hours later, the facility was in ruins. Multiple inmates were injured, and the incident drew national attention, sparking debates about prison reform and state responsibility. This riot was not an isolated event. It was a warning sign of the instability that would continue to define Picaleña. In the years that followed, smaller but still dangerous outbreaks continued. Conflicts between gangs often escalated into full-block fights. A single stabbing could lead to retaliation, which could trigger a block lockdown, which could then spark resistance. Fires remained a common tactic. They gave inmates control of the environment, disrupted visibility, and forced guards to move with caution. In a prison where gang leaders often have more influence than uniformed officers, riots became strategic tools, not just emotional eruptions. Escape attempts added another layer of chaos. Some were crude and desperate. Tunnels scratched into the ground with improvised tools, ropes made of torn sheets, or attempts to break through weakened parts of the perimeter fence. Others were more sophisticated. Reports detail cases where weapons, tools, or metal cutters were smuggled inside by corrupt officers. Attempted escapes often led to intense confrontations. Guards used tear gas and rubber bullets. Inmates responded with fire, makeshift shields, and coordinated attacks designed to distract or overwhelm security teams. In one notable attempt, a group of inmates managed to breach an internal gate after overpowering a small team of guards. They reached the prison yard, hoping to scale the outer fence, but were stopped when reinforcements arrived. The incident exposed weaknesses in the guard rotation system and highlighted how easily a coordinated group could take advantage of lapses in staffing or surveillance. Even without full-scale riots or escape attempts, daily tensions created frequent outbreaks of violence. Sometimes a small dispute over water access led to stabbings. Sometimes a gang rivalry simmered for days before exploding into open confrontation. Reports from former inmates speak of nights when the entire block stayed awake, listening for the sound of metal scraping against concrete, an improvised blade being prepared. Every noise could signal an attack. Every flicker of light in the hallway meant movement. Fear shaped behavior, especially during nights when the guards avoided entering dangerous wings. For officers, responding to riots and escapes became a test of survival. Many guards lacked proper equipment, training, or backup. Some entered dangerous areas only with improvised shields or outdated riot gear. Others hesitated to intervene, knowing inmates outnumbered them and controlled the terrain. There were cases where guards were cornered or injured during confrontations. Picaleña became a place where even the staff felt trapped by the environment. The structural failures of the prison only amplified the chaos. Electrical outages left wings in darkness. Water shortages turned riots into health disasters. Smoke from fires lingered for days, staining walls and ceilings. Ventilation failures made entire blocks suffocating during periods of uprising. The facility's design, meant to enforce order, became a hazard by trapping inmates in dead-end hallways and narrow corridors during emergencies. One of the most symbolic moments of collapse came during a riot when a large gate meant to separate two rival-controlled blocks was destroyed entirely. Inmates flooded through the opening, and guards had no immediate way to contain the movement. For several hours, the prison's internal geography changed. Boundaries disappeared. Entire territories merged into one chaotic mass. When the dust settled, the gate lay twisted on the floor, a physical reminder of how quickly Picaleña's defenses could crumble. Riots and escapes inside Picaleña are not random. They're symptoms of a system pushed beyond its limit. Every outbreak tells the same story: overcrowding, scarcity, desperation, and fractured authority. Violence becomes a release valve, a negotiation tool, or a battle for power. And each event, no matter how quickly contained, leaves scars on the walls and on the people living behind them. In Picaleña, the question is never whether another riot will happen. The question is when, and how much of the prison will fall apart next time. The human cost, families, reforms, and the fight for change. For all the violence, corruption, and systemic collapse inside Picaleña Prison, the deepest wounds are often inflicted far beyond its walls. The human cost stretches into the homes of families waiting outside, into courtrooms where lawyers argue over impossible cases, and into the offices of activists who have spent years fighting a system that seems determined to remain broken. While Picaleña's reputation centers on brutality and chaos, the emotional toll of its dysfunction reveals an even more painful truth. The suffering doesn't stop with the prisoners. It radiates outward, affecting everyone connected to them. Many of the inmates inside Picaleña are not hardened gang leaders or career criminals. They're men caught by poverty, circumstances, or Colombia's backlog of legal cases. Some are still awaiting trial. Others are serving short sentences, but endure conditions harsher than those faced by the country's most notorious criminals. Their families, mothers, wives, children, are forced into a different kind of prison, one built from uncertainty, fear, and the constant hope that their loved ones will survive another day. Every week, long lines form outside Picaleña's entrance as families wait for visiting hours. They bring food, water, medicine, and hygiene supplies, items the prison is supposed to provide but rarely does. Visitors report being treated with suspicion, disrespect, and at times, outright hostility. The wait times can stretch for hours under the scorching sun, and there's always the fear that a riot or lockdown will cancel the visit entirely. When they finally see their loved ones, it's often through thick glass or in crowded rooms filled with guards barking orders. Many family members walk away shaken by the physical and psychological deterioration they witness. The stories are consistent. Inmates lose drastic amounts of weight, develop infections that go untreated, or show signs of psychological trauma. Some families have taken their cases to Colombian courts, adding to the ongoing legal pressure surrounding Picaleña. In recent years, the Constitutional Court of Colombia has repeatedly ruled that Picaleña violates fundamental human rights. Judges have ordered the government to reduce overcrowding, increase food supply, improve medical services, and restore control over gang-dominated blocks. But each ruling highlights the same problem. Change moves slowly, while the suffering continues at full speed. Reform efforts inside the prison face enormous obstacles. The infrastructure is collapsing, the staffing is inadequate, and corruption runs deep. Even when new policies are introduced on paper, implementation becomes another battle. Guards claim they are overworked, underpaid, and outnumbered. Administrators blame budget constraints and political delays. Meanwhile, inmates and their families see little difference. Activists and human rights organizations play a crucial role in documenting abuses and applying public pressure. Groups conduct interviews with former inmates, gather photographic evidence, and publish reports detailing overcrowding, violence, and corruption. But their work is dangerous. Exposing criminal networks and government failures attracts threats and resistance. Still, these organizations persist, often driven by the testimonies of families who refuse to stay silent. One of the most persistent issues is medical neglect. Families describe situations where inmates with serious illnesses, such as tuberculosis, infections, or untreated injuries, are ignored for days or weeks. Requests for medical attention are often dismissed unless a bribe is paid. In some cases, inmates die from preventable conditions. These deaths rarely receive public attention. They are buried within official statements that cite natural causes or prior health complications. For the families, these explanations only deepen the grief. Children are among the silent victims of Picaleña's chaos. Growing up with a parent behind bars brings stigma, emotional trauma, and financial strain. Many children ask why their father is sick, thin, or unable to come home. Families do their best to protect them from the harsh realities, but the truth eventually seeps in. The effects can last a lifetime. Despite the overwhelming challenges, some families and activists do find small victories. Court rulings occasionally force temporary improvements, such as emergency medical interventions, block inspections, or crackdowns on guard corruption. New programs appear from time to time, offering educational workshops or religious services. Rehabilitation advocates argue that Colombia's prison system must shift from punishment to restoration, but progress is uneven and easily undone by a single riot or administrative reshuffle. Inside Picaleña, inmates cling to whatever hope they can find. Some join religious groups, looking for structure in a place ruled by chaos. Others work in prison jobs or educational activities, not because it transforms their circumstances, but because it gives them a sense of purpose. A few maintain contact with their families as a lifeline. Letters, phone calls, and visits become their emotional anchor. For many, hope is the only thing that keeps them from collapsing under the weight of violence and fear. Yet even hope has its limits. Every reform promise seems to collide with the same reality. Picaleña was never built to hold this many people, nor was it equipped to manage the power structures that evolved inside its walls. The system's failures are not isolated incidents. They are chronic, structural, and deeply intertwined with Colombia's broader social challenges. As Colombia continues debating prison reform, Picaleña stands as a symbol of what happens when a state loses control of its correctional institutions. It's a warning to policymakers and a rallying point for activists. Above all, it's a reminder that behind every statistic is a human life, a man trying to survive, a family waiting for answers, and a nation struggling to balance justice with humanity. Real change will require more than court rulings or temporary interventions. It will require rebuilding trust, restructuring institutions, and addressing the cultural and political forces that allowed Picaleña to descend into chaos. Whether the country can achieve that remains uncertain. What is certain is the cost of doing nothing. More violence, more suffering, and more families caught in the long shadow cast by one of the world's toughest prisons. Picaleña Prison is more than a facility. It's a mirror reflecting the failures, frustrations, and fractures within an entire system. Overcrowded, underfunded, and overrun by inmate factions, it stands as one of the clearest examples of how a prison can collapse from the inside out. Behind every riot, every power struggle, and every human rights ruling lies a deeper truth. The people trapped inside are not just prisoners, they're fathers, sons, brothers, and human beings forgotten by society. As debates continue and reforms move slowly, the story of Picaleña forces a difficult question. How long can a system built on chaos continue before it breaks completely? And when it does, who will be left to pick up the pieces? This has been Behind Bars. the world's toughest prisons, Picaleña, Colombia, a place where survival is a daily battle, and hope is the rarest commodity of all.